Out looking through the passenger window, Oswald sees the dead possum again at the side of the road. Oswald compared the dead possum to the town he lives in, looking outside and seeing many boarded up windows for what used to be stores. 3 years ago, when Oswald was 7, there were actually things to do in this town, but then the mill closed. The mill had basically been the reason the town existed in the first place. Hundreds of workers of the mill, one of whom was his father, had lost their jobs. A lot of families moved away, including Oswald's best friend, Ben, and his family. The reason Oswald's family stayed is because his mother had a steady job at the hospital, as well as not wanting to move away from his grandmother. So his father ended up with a part-time job at the snack space, and Oswald watched the town die. Oswald's dad stopped at Westbrook Elementary. This was Oswald's last day of school before summer. During class, he takes out his notebook and starts drawing. He didn't know why, but lately he had been drawing mechanical animals, bears, bunnies, and birds. He imagined them being human size and moving with the jerkiness of robots in an old sci-fi fiction movie. They were furry on the outside, but the fur covered a hard metal skeleton filled with gears and circuits. Sometimes he drew the animals' exposed metal endoskeletons, or sketched them with the fur peeled back to show some of the mechanical workings underneath. It was a creepy effect, like seeing a person's skull peeking out from beneath the skin. At recess, Oswald pondered about the summer. What was he gonna do? He heard other kids saying what they would do, and it all sounded so much fun. But because of the money problem, he was gonna stay in this dead town all summer. It wouldn't have been a problem if Ben was here, but now a summer without Ben yawned for him, wide and empty. The next day, Oswald's dad was making dinner, while his mother was at work. His mother was at work most of the time. The only time he ever gets to see her was during breakfast before school and before the weekend. But her job is the main income to pay the bills, since his dad's job is part-time. "You know, I was thinking," Dad said. "I know you're old enough to stay home by yourself, but I don't like the idea of you staying by yourself the whole day while your mom and I were at work. I was thinking you could ride in town with me in the mornings, and I could drop you off at the library. You could read, surf the net." "Nobody says surf the net anymore, Dad." "They do now, because I just said it. Anyway, I thought you could hang out in the library in the mornings. When you get hungry, you could head over to Jeff's Pizza for a slice and a soda, and I could pick you up there once my shift's over at 3. Oswald thought about Jeff's Pizza. Jeff's Pizza was kind of weird. It wasn't dirty exactly, but it was run down. The vinyl on the booth seats had been repaired with duct tape, and the plastic letters had fallen off the menu board above the counter, so the listed toppings included pepperoni and hamburger. It was clear that Jeff's Pizza was used to be something bigger and better than it now was. There were tons of unused floor space and lots of unused electrical outlets along the base of the walls. Also, on the far wall was a small stage, even though there were no performances there, not even so much as a karaoke night. It was a strange place, sad, and not what it had once been, like the rest of the town. Oswald agrees with his father's request. The next day after breakfast and spending small time with his mom, Oswald went to the library. Later that day, he went to Jeff's Pizza. Jeff's Pizza was as weird as he remembered. The big empty stage beyond the booths and tables was like a dance floor where nobody danced. The walls were painted a pale yellow, but they must have used cheap paint or only one coat, because shapes of whatever had been on the walls before were still visible. It had probably been some kind of mural with people or animals. but now it was just shadows behind a thin veil of yellow paint. Oswald sometimes tried to figure out what the shapes were, but they were too blobby to make out. Then there was the stage that never got used, standing empty but seemingly waiting for something, though a feature even weirder than the stage lay in the back right corner. It was a large rectangular pen surrounded by yellow netting, but it had been roped off with a sign that said, "Do not use." The pen itself was filled with blue, red, and green plastic balls that had probably been brightly colored once, but were now faded and fuzzy with dust. Along with the empty stage and ball pit, the strangest feature in Jeff's Pizza is Jeff himself. Jeff was the only employee. He took orders and made the pizza. Today, like all the other days, Jeff looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. His dark hair was sticking up in weird places, and he had alarming bags under his bloodshot eyes. His apron was stained with both recent and ancient tomato sauce. Oswald orders a pizza slice and a soda, and starts eating, while reading his book he got from the library. The days at the library and Jeff's Pizza started to add up. The first couple of weeks had been great, but now the library didn't have the next book in the series he was reading. He hadn't gotten tired of pizza yet, though, but he was starting to imagine that he might be in the future. During Family Fun Night, Oswald and his father were watching a remake of an old sci-fi movie. Once the movie was over, Dad said, "Well, that was pretty good, but not as good as the real version." "What do you mean, the real version?" "That's the real version." "Not really. I mean, it was set in the same universe as the real version, but it was kind of a cheap knockoff of the one that came out when I was a kid." Dad always had to be so opinionated. He could never just watch something and enjoy it. "So the best movies are always the ones that you watched when you were a kid." "Not always, but in this case, yes." Dad was settling in, Oswald could tell, for one of his favorite things, a good argument. "But the special effects in the original version stink. All of those puppets and rubber masks." "I'll take a puppet or model over CGI any day," Dad said, leaning back on the couch and propping his feet on the coffee table. "That stuff is so slick and fake. It's got no warmth, no texture. And besides, you like those old Zentralex movies, and the special effects in those are terrible." "Yeah, but I watch those to make fun of them," Oswald said, even though he really did think Zentralex was pretty cool. Mom came in from the kitchen with bowls of ice cream. "Okay, if you guys don't cut out the nerd argument, I'm going to pick the next movie we watch, and it's gonna be a romantic comedy." Oswald and his dad shut up immediately. "That's about what I thought," Mom said, passing around the bowls of ice cream. After Family Fun Night was over for tonight, Oswald laid in bed when Ben texted him. "Hey. Hey back. How's your summer?" "Awesome. Admiral Beach for vacation. It's so cool. Arcades and mini-golfs everywhere." "Jealous." Oswald meant it. "Wish you were here." "Me too." "How's your summer?" "Okay. Been going to the library a lot. Lunch at Jeff's Pizza." "That's all?" "Pretty much, yeah." "I'm sorry. That pizza place is creepy." They chatted a little while longer, and although Oswald was happy to hear from Ben, he was also sad that his friend was so far away and having such a good time without him. Monday morning, and Oswald was in a bad mood, and his father notices from the driver's seat. He asks him what's wrong. Oswald didn't feel like talking, but clearly he was being forced to, and once he opened his mouth, he was surprised to feel complaints erupting from him like lava from a volcano. "I'm tired of every day being exactly the same. Ben texted me yesterday. He's at Myrtle Beach, having an awesome time. He wanted to know what I was doing, and I told him I was going to the library and Jeff's Pizza every day. And you know what he texted back? 'I'm sorry,' and 'that pizza place is creepy.'" His father sighed. "I'm sorry we can't go on vacation and have an awesome time, Oz. Things are hard right now, where money's concerned. I'm sorry it affects you." You're a kid. You shouldn't have to worry about money. I'm hoping they'll move me to full-time at the store in the fall. That'll help a lot. And if I get promoted to deli manager, it'll be another $1.50 an hour. Oswald knew he shouldn't say what he was about to say, but here he went anyway. Ben's dad got a job that he pays even better than his old job at the mill. Dad tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Yeah, well, and Ben's dad had to move 500 miles away to get that job. His voice sounded tight as his grip on the wheel, and Oswald could tell his jaw was clenched. Your mom and I talked about it, but we decided not to move, especially with your grandma living here and needing help sometimes. This is our home, kiddo, and things aren't perfect, but we just have to make the best of them. And so every day you toss me out on the street like garbage. If this is the best of things, I'd hate to see the worst. Now, son, don't you think that's a little dramatic? Oswald didn't hear the rest before stepping out of the car and slamming the door. His dad sped away, probably glad to get rid of him. Again, the library still didn't have the book he wanted, so he watched some YouTube videos instead. He then went to Jeff's Pizza at lunchtime. Oswald thought about his argument with his dad that morning. Soon, Dad would be texting him, expecting him to come outside to the car. Well, today was going to be different. Today, Dad would have to come and find him. There was one perfect place to hide. Oswald was going into the pit. He wanted to prank his dad and make him actually step out of the car and make an effort for a change. Oswald laid down into the ball pit. Strangely, some of the balls were sticky, but he didn't think much of it. Oswald laid there for a bit, waiting for his dad to come look for him. When he came up to take proper breath, he suddenly heard the sound of beeping electronics and yelling and laughing kids. It took a few seconds for his eyes to adjust from the darkness of the pit to the brightness that now surrounded him. He looked around and muttered, "Toto? I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." The walls were lined with shiny arcade cabinets housing games he'd heard his dad talk about from his own childhood. He looked down at the pit and realized he was surrounded by little kids wallowing in the strangely clean and now brightly colored plastic orbs. He stepped out and noticed a lot of kids were his age, but the kids looked like they were in a different time era. He looked at the direction of the music and saw a small stage with 3 animatronics dancing to the music: a brown bear, a blue rabbit, and some kind of bird girl. They reminded Oswald of the mechanical animals he had caught himself drawing lately. The difference was that he could never decide if the animals in the drawings were cute or creepy. These were creepy, but the kids didn't seem to mind. When the smell of pizza hit Oswald's nose, he understood. He was still in Jeff's Pizza, or more accurately, what Jeff's Pizza had been before Jeff took over. The ball pit was new and not roped off. All the outlets on the wall had arcade games plugged into them, and he turned around to face the left wall. On the wall of Jeff's Pizza was a mural of the same characters performing on the stage: the brown bear, the blue rabbit, and the bird girl. Below their faces were the words, "Freddy Fazbear's Pizza." Oswald's insides turned to ice water. How had this happened? He knew where he was, but he didn't know when it was or how he got there. Somebody bumped into him, and he jumped more than was normal. Since he felt the physical contact, this must not be a dream. He couldn't decide if this fact was good news or not. The kid apologizes and introduces himself to Oswald. His name was Chip. He asks Oswald if he wanted to play skee-ball with his buddy Mike. Oswald agrees. It was nice to hang out with some other kids, even if they seemed to be kids from another time. He didn't think this was a dream, but it sure was weird as one. On the way, they passed somebody in a rabbit suit that looked like a yellow version of the animatronic rabbit on the stage. Nobody else seemed to be paying attention to the rabbit guy, so Oswald didn't say anything. It was probably a Freddy Fazbear's employee dressed up to entertain the little kids at the birthday party. After playing some skee-ball, Oswald begins to worry about how he would get out of here. And how long has it been since his dad been looking for him? He excuses himself from Chip and Mike and went into the ball pit again. How long to stay under? Randomly, he decided to count to 100, then stand. He rose to his feet and found himself standing in the dusty, roped-off ball pit at Chef's Pizza. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out and read, "We'll be there in 2 minutes." Had no time passed at all? He headed out the door. "See ya, kid." The next day, Oswald was in a better mood. He practically skipped library and went to Jeff's Pizza at 11. Jeff was in the kitchen when he got there, so he made a beeline for the pit. He went in and counted to 100. He then got out and he was in Freddy's again. Everything looked as it had before. He had even caught a sight of a calendar hanging in an open office that helped him pinpoint the date, 1985. "Hey, it's Oswald." "Hey, Oz," Mike said. "Anybody ever call you that? Like the Wizard of Oz?" "They do now," Oz said, grinning. He had gone from having the loneliest summer ever to having two new friends and a nickname. True, all of these seemed to be happening in the mid-80s, but why get hung up on the details? The three of them went to eat some pizza. On the way to their table, they passed someone in that same yellow rabbit suit, who was standing in a corner, still as a statue. Chip and Mike either didn't see him or ignored him, so Oswald tried to ignore him as well. Why hide in the corner like that, though? If he worked for the restaurant, surely he wasn't supposed to act all creepy. After eating the pizza, they played skee-ball again, until they ran low on tokens. Oswald decides to go back and thanks his two friends. Hanging out with Chip and Mike turned into a regular thing. It was the best time Oswald had ever since Ben left, but not everything was perfect. Chip and Mike mostly talked about movies and TV shows, most of which he never had even seen. He sometimes had to fake his way through by smiling and nodding and being generally agreeable. There was also another problem. For his first few visits to 1985's Freddy Fazbear's, it hadn't even occurred to him that he was basically mooching off Chip and Mike's generosity because he never had any money of his own. And even if he wasn't broke in his own time, would the money be brought from the present day even work in 1985? It was kind of pitiful being broke in 2 decades. He apologizes to them for not splitting the money for the pizza. They say it's alright, and asks him if they want to play some games. He agrees. When he stood up, he felt a strange heaviness in his pockets. Something in them was so heavy he felt like his jeans might fall down. He reached in his pockets and pulled out double handful of 1985 Freddy Fazbear's game tokens. He produced a handful after handful and dumped them on the table. "Or we could all play using these," he said. He had no idea how to explain the magic that had just occurred. "I guess I forgot I was wearing these pants, the ones that had all the tokens in them." Chip and Mike looked a little confused, but then they grinned and started raking coins from the table into their empty soda cups. Oswald did the same. He decided just to go with the weirdness. He didn't know how the tokens got there, but then again, he didn't really know how he got there either. In the morning, as Dad was driving him to the library, Oswald asked him, "Dad, how old were you in 1985? "I was just a couple years older than you. And other than baseball, all I can think about was how many quarters I had to spend at the arcade." "Why do you ask?" "No reason in particular. I've just been doing some research. Jeff's Pizza, back before it was Jeff's Pizza, it was some kind of arcade, wasn't it?" "Yeah, it was." Dad's voice sounded strange. Nervous, maybe. He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "But it closed." "Like everything else in this town," Oswald said. "Pretty much. Yeah," Dad said, pulling up in front of the library. Maybe it was Oswald's imagination, but it seems like his dad was relieved to get to their destination so he wouldn't have to answer any more of his questions. Oswald arrives at Jeff's Pizza, lays down into the ball pit, counts to 100, and goes back up. There were noises, but not the usual ones of Freddy Fazbear's. Screams, crying children, yells for help, the fast footfalls of people running, chaos. Were Chip and Mike here? Were they okay? Was anybody here okay? He was afraid. Part of him wanted to disappear back into the pit, but he was worried about his friends. Also, he was burning with curiosity about what was going on. Even though he knew whatever it was horrible. His stomach in knots, he moved through the crowd, past crying mothers running with their toddlers in their arms, past dads grasping children's hands and leading them swiftly toward the exit, their faces masks of shock. He called out for Chip and Mike, but they were nowhere to be seen. Scared, but feeling as if he had to know what was happening, Oswald walked in the opposite direction from everyone else with an escalating feeling of dread. In front of him stood the man in the yellow bunny costume. If it was a man under there. The bunny opened the door that said private and went inside. Oswald followed. The corridor was long and dark. The rabbit looked at him with blank eyes and an unchanging grin, then walked further down the hall. Oswald wasn't chasing the rabbit, he was letting the rabbit lead him, as if he were in a terrifying version of Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole. The rabbit stopped in front of a door with a sign reading, "Party Room," and beckoned for Oswald to come inside. Oswald was shaking with terror, but he was too curious to refuse. Besides, he kept thinking, "You can't hurt me. I haven't even been born yet." Once inside the room, it took Oswald a few seconds to register what he was actually seeing, and a few more seconds for his brain to process it. They were lined up against the wall, which was painted with images of the place's mascots. The grinning bear, the blue bunny, and the bird girl. Half a dozen kids, none of them older than Oswald, their lifeless bodies propped into sitting positions, their legs stretched out in front of them. Some of them had their eyes closed as if asleep, others' eyes were open, frozen in an empty, doll-like stare. They were all wearing Freddy Fazbear birthday party hats. Oswald couldn't tell how they had died, but he knew the rabbit was responsible for it. That the rabbit had wanted him to see his handiwork. Maybe the rabbit wanted Oswald to be his next victim, to join the others lined up against the wall with their unseeing eyes. Oswald screamed. The yellow rabbit lunged for him, and he ran out of the room and down the black corridor. Maybe the rabbit could hurt him. Maybe he couldn't. Oswald didn't want to hang around long enough to find out. He ran across the now empty arcade towards the ball pit. Outside, the police siren's screams matched Oswald's own. Oswald dove into the pit. He counted to 100 as fast as he could. He stood up and saw Jeff. He also saw his dad angrily stopping to him. He grabbed his arm and scolded him for not responding to his calls and hiding in the disgusting ball pit. As he was talking, a pair of yellow arms reached out of the pit and pulled Oswald's dad under. Oswald saw his dad struggling in the ball pit until he couldn't see him anymore, and the balls in the pit roiled like a stormy sea, and then they were still. The yellow rabbit rose from the pit, adjusted his purple bow tie, brushed off his front, and turned towards Oswald, grinning. Oswald backed away, but the rabbit was beside him, its arm firmly around Oswald's shoulder, guiding him towards the exit. They both left the place, with Jeff acting like nothing happened. The rabbit threw Oswald into the passenger seat, while it sat in the driver's seat and drove the car. What did you do to my dad? Where are you taking me?" The bunny said nothing. Eventually, they reached Oswald's home. The bunny dragged Oswald to the front door, then yanked off the chain around Oswald's neck that held his house key. The rabbit turned the key in the door and shoved Oswald inside. Then it stood in front of the door, blocking the exit. Jinx the cat wandered into the living room, took one look at the rabbit, arched her back, puffed out her tail, and hissed like a cat on a Halloween decoration. Oswald had never seen her act scared or unfriendly before, and he watched as he turned tail and fled down the hall. If Jinx knew this situation was bad, it must be real bad. He knew the bunny would grab him if he tried to make a run for the back door. So he tells the rabbit that he's going to his bedroom. Oswald slowly backed away until he reached his room. He went inside and locked the door. He pulled out his phone and texted his mother that there's an emergency. All the while the rabbit was standing outside the door. After an hour, Oswald's mother called and says she's on her way. When his mother arrived, Oswald opened the door and told her there is something wrong with Dad, and he doesn't know what happened to him. She tells him his father is laying on the bed watching TV. His mother checks up on Oswald like one of her patients. Oswald tells her that he's fine and that Dad was just acting really weird, and apologizes for getting her worried. She tells him it's alright and that he needs some rest. After Mom left, Oswald looked under the bed. Jinx was still there, crouched in a ball, like she was trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible, her eyes wide and looking terrified. "It's okay, Jinxie," Oswald said, reaching under the bed and wiggling his finger at her. "Mom says it's safe. You can come out now." The cat wouldn't budge. Oswald begins to have doubts about what his mother had told him. The next day was the first day of school. Oswald went downstairs for breakfast. He greeted his mother and sat down to eat breakfast. The yellow thing walked in and sat across from him at the breakfast table. His mom acted like everything's normal. Heartbeat beating like a jackhammer in his chest. Oswald asks his mom about Dad's whereabouts. His mom tells him that he's sitting right in front of him. Later, Oswald looked under the bed and saw Jinx still hiding. The yellow thing drives Oswald to the school, and no one at school seemed to notice that there was a giant yellow rabbit in the driving seat. As Oswald gets out of the car, he tells the yellow rabbit that he's gonna take the bus home when he's done. The yellow rabbit doesn't say anything and drives off. It was impossible to concentrate in class. Usually Oswald was a pretty decent student, but how could he focus with his life and possibly his sanity falling apart? Maybe he should talk to someone, the school counselor or the school police officer. But he knew anything that came out of his mouth would sound dangerously crazy. How could he convince a police officer that his dad was missing if everybody who looked at the yellow thing saw Oswald's dad? There was no one to help him. Oswald was going to have to figure out how to solve this problem himself. In recess, he sat on a bench to think about how he was gonna deal with the yellow thing, and wondering why it acts like his dad. A new girl asks Oswald if she can sit in the opposite side of the bench. Oswald agrees. She sits down and reads a book about mythology. The girl asks Oswald if he ever read much mythology. He says he hasn't. Oswald then asks why did she read the book. She tells him that it makes her feel brave. She's inspired by these Greek heroes fighting giant monsters. Oswald thought about fighting giant monsters. She tells him that she wants to feel brave since she's new to town, and she doesn't have any friends. Oswald held out his hand and introduced himself. She shakes his hand and introduces herself as Gabriella. Somehow, this was the conversation Oswald had needed to have. Oswald got home. He saw the yellow thing vacuuming the living room. Oswald pretended to act like everything was normal and did his chores he would regularly do. While doing his homework, Oswald thinks of a plan to sneak out of the house to Jeff's Pizza without the yellow thing noticing him. His dad must still be in the ball pit. He had to be still alive. He must be. Oswald waited until dark, then waited some more. Finally, he got out of his room and tiptoed through the hallway. The door to his parents' room was open. Oswald looked inside and saw the yellow thing laying on the bed, staring at the wall. Holding his breath, he passed his parents' room, and he was able to tiptoe out of the house. He slowly closed the door behind him and ran. He ran as fast as he can out of his neighborhood until he reached Jeff's Pizza. He saw Jeff at the counter, but otherwise the place was empty. He went inside and ordered something. Jeff went to the kitchen, and Oswald took the chance to go to the ball pit. Oswald looked inside the pit. Eventually, he feels something. He grabs it and tries to pull it, but it was so heavy. He tries again, and the body moved. He pulled his father out of the pit. His father was pale and unconscious, but thankfully still breathing. Oswald was relieved. He felt it before he saw it, the presence behind him. Before he could turn around, a pair of furry yellow arms locked around him in a fearsome embrace. He got his right arm free enough to jab his elbow into the yellow thing's midsection. He got loose, but the thing was blocking the exit to the ball pit. He couldn't get out of the pit by himself, let alone with his poor passed out dad. Acting more than thinking, Oswald charged at the rabbit with his head down. If he could just throw it off balance, or knock it under the surface, maybe he could make it end up in 1985 Freddy Fazbear's, and buy Oswald and his dad some time to escape. He headbutted the yellow thing and knocked it into the ropes and netting that surrounded the ball pit. It stumbled a little, righted itself, and then, arms outstretched, lunged toward Oswald. It pushed Oswald against the wall of the pit, its eyes dead as always. It unhinged its jaw to reveal double rows of fangs, mouth open freakishly wide. It lunged for Oswald's throat, but he blocked it with his arm. Pain pierced Oswald's forearm as the yellow thing sank its fangs into his skin. Oswald used his good arm to punch the rabbit hard in the face before the fangs pierced too deeply. Fangs? What kind of crazy rabbit had fangs? The thing's jaw released their grip, but there was no time to survey the damage, because the thing was launching towards Oswald's dad, its jaw wide open. Oswald elbowed the yellow thing aside and moved between it and his still unconscious father, then used the netting to bounce off and clamber onto the yellow thing's back. He hit his head with his fists, scratching at its eyes, which didn't feel like a living creature's eyes. The rabbit stumbled back into the netting and ropes, then grabbed Oswald's arm and slung him hard off his shoulders and into the pit. Oswald fell headfirst under the surface, grateful that the bottom of the pit was soft. His arm was throbbing, his whole body was exhausted, but he had to get up. He had to save his dad, like those ancient Greek heroes Gabriella had told him about. He had to be brave and face the monster. Oswald rose unsteadily to his feet and saw the yellow thing hanging, sprawling. A rope from the ball pit's netting had looped around the yellow thing's neck. The yellow thing was reaching out for Oswald, seemingly beckoning for help. Oswald stood still. After a few more seconds of struggling, the yellow thing was still. Oswald blinked. Hanging from the rope was nothing but a dirty, empty, yellow rabbit costume. His dad's eyes opened. Oswald rushed to his side. He didn't like to lie to his dad, but after what he has been through, a lie might be the only way forward. So, I hid in the ball pit to play a prank on you, which I shouldn't have done. You came to look for me, and I guess you must have hit your head and lost consciousness. Oswald took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. This part, at least, was the truth. I accept your apology, son, Dad said. He didn't sound mad, just tired. But you're right. You shouldn't have done it. And Jeff really should get rid of this ball pit before he has a lawsuit on his hands. Definitely, Oswald said. He knew he could never set foot in the pit again. He would miss Chip and Mike, but he needed to make some friends in his own time. He helped his father stand up and lean next to him. He paused to look up at the hanging yellow costume. What is that creepy thing? I have no idea, said Oswald. This, too, was the truth. As they approached the front door, Oswald said, Dad, I know I can be a pain sometimes, But I really do love you, you know. Dad looked at him with an expression that seemed both pleased and surprised. Same here, kiddo. Together, they opened the door into the fresh night air. Behind them, Jeff called, "Hey kid, you forgot your soda."